layers, Dobos layers, after they're trimmed. If they happen to break, or one's a little crispy or something, hide those in the middle. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna use the chocolate flavored buttercream, fresh buttercream. With coffee syrup, espresso syrup. So on the board itself, I put a little bit of the French buttercream down just as glue. I put the first layer down, the Dobos layer. I'll then level it, okay? Because eventually if you don't level it, it'll get a little bump in the middle if you don't flatten it out over every layer going on, so after they're going on. So once that goes down, level it, syrup, thin layer of the French buttercream, and the next layer, level it first before you put syrup on it. It'll make a difference too. You want to end up nice and flat on top, but if you don't level it after every addition, it will dome in the middle, so don't do that. So again, 6 layers in the middle. The top I don't syrup, so I'm going to put icing on there anyway, but the chocolate buttercream on the top and on the sides. On the sides, just enough icing so you can actually mask it with the toasted sliced almonds. Make sure they're toasted. They look better, they taste better. All the way up to that top corner. This is also scored into 10 slices. So it's a bow tie, but you guys have done, well, some of you have done the spice cake for service. Same deal. The only problem you might have is trying to approximate what the size of the portion should be. So if you can see that, or take a picture of it, it's basically what you want to see right there. Do this and then do a rosette on the same corner, not in the middle, but pick one corner or the other, and on each slice do a rosette on the same corner. That way when we do the garnish, it'll tilt the right direction, or the same direction rather. So it's got little wedges on there, and we'll tilt them the same way. So again, pick one corner on the same corner in each slice, put a rosette. You get it pretty tall, don't do a like 1.5 or double spiral or anything, but you can actually have a space that's tight to it. Then get it to that point, and then we'll do the garnish. Now, I've cooked the sugar syrup. What's the first thing that goes in the pan?
Water.
Water, and then what?
Sugar.
Sugar. Do you cook it on high heat or low heat? High heat, why?
You get the sugar, you need it for 240. What?
What was that?
You get the sugar to a certain temperature so the sugar melts.
Alright.
So it doesn't crystallize.
So yeah, you want to boil it so it's less likely to crystallize. It doesn't mean it's not going to, but it's less likely that it will if it's on high boil, so make sure that happens. Do you want to stir it?
No.
How come? Exactly. If you agitate it, which is what you want to do when you make fudge, you purposely stir it and causes crystals to form. But usually you don't when you're cooking the syrup, so don't introduce any tools, spoons, fingers, or anything else. If you have to stir it, I just swirl the pan. So in this case, all I'm going to do is caramelize the sugar. Don't make it clear sugar though, you want to get some good color on it so it shows up over the cake layer. If you don't cook it enough, it'll just be a clear window and all you'll see is the color of the cake, which is fine, but it's kind of pale, so you want to get some good color on the sugar. It'll darken this up and get a good shine to it. So the sugar I've got in the pan, when you cook a sugar syrup, and again, it's all about hitting the final temperature, right? So what you start with matters a little bit, but you're always going to cook enough water out to hit a certain temp. So anyway, for sugar syrup, you're going to start doing a 4-to-1 ratio, which means 4 parts sugar, 1 part water. So you can scale up or scale down, but it's always the same ratio. Or, if you think of it this way, wet sand, or the feel of wet sand. So you can start with a little water in the pan, pour your sugar that you need in there, and then stir it, and then add water as you wish till it feels like wet sand, or just do a 4-to-1. by volume, not by weight, but by volume. And then you cook to whatever temperature you want. Now in this case, we're going for a good color on it. So not only technically taking a temperature on it, but it's when it gets above 310 is when sugar caramelizes. That's when all the water is gone. It's just the sugar in there getting hot. So again, we're not taking temperatures. We're just going to cook it until it gets some good color on it. So right now it's on high boil. I've already dissolved my granulated sugar, so it's going to cut the time that this takes to happen during the demo. But you want to set up a cutting board with parchment, just a half sheet. You then want 2 utensils. One's going to be your chef's knife, a little bit of pan spray on it, and then your large offset, a little bit of pan spray on the bottom. If you get too much on there, it'll slough off onto the sugar, not really do what you need to. So just a light coating of that, nothing really thick. Just take a paper towel to it if you happen to get too much on there. So with this setup, well, I should mention this too, it's like clean water and a brush. In case I get crystals forming, I can wash down the sides of the pan. But don't add too much water because then it takes longer to hit that temperature or whatever you're trying to hit. Alright, so have the your best cake layer on the one corner of the parchment. Oh, I should back up again. The sugar amount in this pan is enough for 2 of these discs. So what I've got in there now, and it's double what I need. I only need one disc worth, but that's 2 cups of sugar and a half cup of water. Right? So that's enough for 2 people's garnishes. When you do teams of 2, that's the batch size you'll need. 2 cups of sugar, half cup of water. So anyway, have that on in one corner. We're gonna caramelize the sugar when it's good color, nice. Well, not really dark, but fairly dark. We're going to pull it off of the heat, pour it over this disc. We may or may not have to use the offset to push the sugar to cover the rest of the disc, because you might get spots where it didn't quite coat with the sugar, so you might have to push it one way or the other. So that's why that oil should be on the bottom. So whether you pour it and use the offset, or whether you just pour it and it's done, that's fine. You'll let it sit a little while, usually about, I don't know, 30 seconds, to let the chocolate, or let the sugar cool a little bit. That way when you pick it up and move it, which is what you'll do, to a second location, you should have nice edges all the way around. If you move it too soon, it's kind of like that chocolate band. If you move it too soon, there's still chocolate coming off of it, and leave you rough edges. Well, same thing with the sugar. Let it cool just enough so when you pick it up. This is a nice clean edge when you move it. Then you need to move fairly quickly with your oiled knife. You want to cut this into 10 wedges to approximate the size and shape of all these portions on here. So score this first so you have an idea of how to cut this later, okay? Or at least have this, look at this right before you cut this so you know what size you need for those garnishes. So again, we'll caramelize the sugar, we'll pour it over this corner, let it set a few seconds, and then move it over here and then cut it. You're going to cut all the way through. Again, bow tie. We'll cut, do a little wiggle so it separates the pieces a little bit, because sometimes what happens is the sugar wants to flow back into itself and glue it back together. It's not the end of the world as long as you separate it when it's still kind of warm. If it starts to get cold, it might crack, and then you got cracks on the sugar on top of that. It just looks nice. So cut it, give it a little wiggle so it separates just a bit, and then do your next cut. If it starts to stick, you might have to reapply pan spray. Be ready for that. Usually you won't, but you might have to, so have that pan spray handy. Parchment is here just to aid in cleanup. Usually if you keep the sugar on the parchment, it's easier to get rid of this. If it happens to get on the cutting board, let it cool, and just take a bench scraper, kind of chip it off, or just crack it and chip it off. It can come off pretty easily anyway, but the parchment does help with cleanup on this. So again, get a good caramel color on that sugar. Don't pull it off when it's too clear. Because number one, it'll be sticky if it's too clear. it won't have cooked enough water out or all the water out. And it'll be hard to handle without stick to everything. So all the water's out of this syrup now. It's starting to get color on it, so it's definitely over 310. And again, there's different ranges of caramelization. You can get really dark, that you've seen on the brulee, or fairly light as well, but there's all different ranges over 310. So you might find as well, if you glaze 2 of these with the same pot, the second one's going to be darker because the sugar is constantly getting hot. Even though it's technically off the flame, it's still getting darker. So it's that honey color here, maybe a little darker than that. Pour it. Got a little gap over here, I'm going to pull that sugar that direction. Yeah, just enough oil that won't stick, so be aware of that. Don't get too much pressure, just a little bit. If you need to, you might not have to use this at all.
It's like an egg.
If you get hot sugar on your finger,
It hurts.
ideally have an ice bath nearby or right at your table. If you don't, press it to the metal table. It'll get the heat out as quickly as it can with what you've got available to you. So ice bath is better. We usually don't want to run around while that sugar burns you, so I just press it to the table and move it around so the cold table is what's taking the heat out. It'll just hold it in one place. After that, do not peel the sugar off. You have to let it dissolve and then take it off, because you can do more damage if you just immediately rip it off.
Saw Chris with his finger last.
You what?
Saw Chris with his finger last term.
Oh yeah.
That was gnarly.
So this is going to leave me clean edges. It's just cool off enough. We'll move it to an opposite corner on this parchment. The strings are okay. Those are easily broken off. Those aren't going to cause any cracks to happen, so that's going to be alright. So, again, keeping in mind the size and shape of what you need on your cake for these 10 wedges here. So, bow tie. Again, a little wiggle so they separate, and then in half here. And for the 10, all we need to do is cut these last 4 portions in half. So not in the thirds, but in half. Wiggle too much, they move too much, so hold on. But you want to know you're going all the way to the parchment when you cut through. Don't just oh, it feels right, and then you're not sure, and the sugar's still connected, and all that jazz, so don't stick it. So one more cut, or 2. If you're fast enough, you can do this half at a time, or go across the whole thing. So they're all cut. Now you can go back as they cool and kind of separate them out. If I have to, cut away just a little bit of whatever sugar's reconnected, if there is any, and then kind of pull those away. So be careful when you handle these. Do not put your fingers on top because they'll leave marks, so handle from the edges and the sides. If you have any thin sugar, you can certainly shave those pieces off now, break them off. I'm putting these on the table because I want to use them quickly for demo. And put them on the cake. So that's the other thing. Let them cool before you put them on the buttercream. Otherwise they'll melt that buttercream, and every time you pipe that rosette, you kind of wasted your time. Because you want these to tilt on the rosettes. If they're too hot, they'll flatten them out and they'll just melt them. So, you guys have any questions on that? This is still warm though, it's not quite sticking, so it is possible to do this too, kind of pull it up. This is more dangerous though, using a knife to do this, be careful. So, use it clean if you're mindful of it anyway. So as far as the pan of sugar I use, this will happen again later on when we do candies. You need to boil out your sugar. Do not just pour this down the drain, because it will solidify. Yes, it will eventually dissolve in the drain, because all the water is going to go down the drain anyway, but it'll plug it up too. So what you want to do is, number one, leave the pan with hot sugar on the stove top. You can turn the flame off, of course, but don't move this unless you absolutely have to. What you want to do is bring water to the pan. Don't walk around the kitchen with hot sugar in a pan, because it's really dangerous. So leave this on the flame while the heat. Turn off the flame. I always have a pitcher of water ready to go. It's sitting on a pilot light, so it's fairly warm. And then as soon as I'm done with that sugar, I can pour the water in and boil it out. So all I'm going to do is dissolve it basically, so then I can pour it down the drain. There'll be enough water added to it, it won't be solid anymore. So pour the water in, make sure all the sugar is covered, and then just bring it to a little bit of a boil. Do medium flame. The trick on this side is don't forget about it, because if you let it dry out and let it burn, it's really hard to clean that burnt sugar out of the pan. Not impossible, but it's a waste of time. So really keep an eye on it. Set a timer if you need to, but boil it out to dissolve it, and then that can go down the drain, no problem. Okay? But bring the water to the pan. Don't walk around popping sugar in the pan. Yeah, sketchy stuff happens. Anyway. So notice I've got the sides masked all the way to the top corner. I've got everything scored. My rosette's ready to go. As far as Dobos goes, Josef Dobos was the gentleman's name. His family is from Hungary. In the early 1800s, they did one of the first food part of one of the first expositions where they had food items for sale. But this was made to mimic Queen Elizabeth's crown, because at the time she was a champion of Hungarian independence, and not only was the cake delicious, but she liked it, and she promoted it, so they changed the name, or changed the garnish rather, to look like her crown. So that's the deal with the shiny wedges of colored sugar on the cake layer. So I'm going to tilt these on each rosette. Anyway, the Dobos family is basically, I keep saying Swiss family, not Swiss family, what's the name of that? Cracker Barrels, I'm trying to think of. Swiss Colony, that's the other term, but no one knows Swiss Colony anymore, because I'm getting old, I guess, some people do. Yeah. Anyway, they made lots of different types of food for sale, and they ship things around Europe, but this is the one cake that they did a lot of, and that has their name on it, obviously. Pretty popular at the time. So when you place these garnishes, you still want to make sure that the score lines are visible, so that way you can cut around the garnish and not disturb anything. So what that means is you can't really go into the center. You have to pull it out a little bit, so chances are you'll have just a little bit of an overhang in your cake layers. And what I'm trying to do is match up the wedge size with my score size, so it's closer. But just tilt it, make sure it's inside the score marks. So when you go to cut it, you won't have to move the garnish at all. It's going to be part of the cake slice. So there is, it's kind of like a crepe cake in the South where they do layers in a skillet, multiple thin layers of cake, and they do chocolate icing with it, and they leave it naked on the outside so you see the layers and the filling. But and it's similar to this too, but the garnish, they don't do the same garnish obviously. So the Dobos Torte. This is also a fairly rich one with all the chocolate buttercream.
Delicious.
So it needs a small portion size usually. I'm plugging this in. What? No, it's okay. You guys have any questions on that?